We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
SCOTUS is back. A new session set to get underway, but this time it feels a little bit different. In recent history, there's not been such vitriol reserved for the courts. The Democrats want it expanded, the media call it out on almost every decision. And based on the various narratives and spin, the American public are beginning to wonder if it's fit for purpose. So extensive are these attacks against the highest of high courts that a number of justices have taken to defending themselves in public. Is this normal? Is it damaging? And what does the Supreme Court have for us this coming session? Well, to talk liberty, we're here with the host of the Uprising podcast, constitutional attorney and author, Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Welcome aboard, Scott.
Hi, Mark.
So, Scott, we've had Clarence Thomas speaking in public about his decisions and how he makes them. Amy Coney Barrett felt the need to do the same. Now, is this normal behavior for justices? The media suggests that it isn't, but I'm not so sure.
Well, justices are frequently quoted for remarks that they give. They don't remark as much as, a pundit on TV or the internet might, but they do live lives off the bench in the legal world. So these typically include in the springtime, you'll hear justices comment as they give commencement addresses, for instance, and throughout the year, they may go to legal conferences when they're not actively seated and hearing cases. And so this was a Notre Dame University event, I believe, and that's where the both justices spoke. And I don't think that Thomas spoke out of turn or in any way that was somehow unique or earth-shattering. I mean, it is news when they address their own decision-making, certainly, but it wasn't earth-shattering what he said.
I want to run an analysis past you here, Scott, and give me your professional opinion on it. If the justices deliver for conservatives in their decisions, the left will insist that something has to change. If they don't, the right will say something has to change. Either way, is SCOTUS in trouble? Is it high noon at the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's only in trouble, Mark, if the calls are taken seriously rather than the attempt at either gaining votes or just political power or fundraising, which I think most of them are. There's certainly some genuine calls for change or reform on both sides of the aisle, but a lot of what you see is just making hay for the sake of it, I think. And so, yes, the Supreme Court doesn't have, with the exception of some U.S. Marshals, I guess, maybe, it doesn't really have any way to enforce its will. Except for through the other branches and through the body of Americans who respect those decisions, even if we disagree with them. And to the extent that erodes significantly, well, then you're headed down the path of trouble. Absolutely.
By trouble, do you mean court packing or appointments?
All manner of mischief might befall the court if we see, approval and trust dip massively. There was a Gallup poll released recently that showed that the trust in the court is at its lowest point. Now, it's not like it dipped 100 points, but it did dip a significant number of percentage points for people who think that the court is apolitical and kind of respect their judgments. So now 40%, sometimes the lead is buried. 40% of Americans basically think the court does a good job. And then it's the other 60. Some of those folks think it's too liberal. Some think it's too conservative on both sides of the aisle.
Okay, so let's talk about this upcoming term. The format, it's a little bit different this time, right? And I believe that means that one of the results of this different format is that we're likely to hear a little bit more from Justice Clarence Thomas.
Well, not necessarily more than we have in the past year, but more than we have in the courtroom. So when the COVID pandemic hit, the Supreme Court went to an all-virtual environment where the litigators and also the justices were not in the courtroom and participating basically via like a Zoom call. And Mark, before the pandemic, and I don't know when this system went into effect, but it was certainly before I went into law school or probably was even born, and that was that while the advocates for either side of the case get a prescribed amount of minutes in order to discuss their arguments, justices can jump in at any time, and they often do, and they interrupt the litigants and they interrupt each other. Now, it's not a sort of free-for-all. It's with a design to getting towards exposure of certain legal points and arguments during the oral argument. Well, that went away during the pandemic. When the pandemic came in, the Supreme Court went to an all virtual environment on Zoom. And what happened was they would go through each justice, basically in order of seniority, to find out if they had any questions. And during that Zoom break in the tradition, that's when Justice Thomas came to life. Now, for those who don't know, it's not just that Justice Thomas is quiet during oral arguments. He went over 10 years, Mark, without asking a single question during oral arguments. So the man has a great capacity to remain silent during oral argument. But for those of us, and I count myself one, who are most appreciative of his mind and reasoning on the court, we certainly like it when he weighs in at oral argument. And we think we're going to see more of it as we go forward, because now they're going to do a hybrid where they have the usual free-for-all kind of jump-in thing like they used to do. And then after that, they're going to do a by seniority run-through. And it seems like we will see more Thomas in this, but we'll have to wait and see as the cases are argued.
So is this new format, is it going to benefit or hinder the cut and thrust that we expect in a lively courtroom, especially on such major constitutional issues, and also in helping the public understand the decision-making process, like how the justices arrive at their decisions?
Well, for the last part of your question, I have no idea about the how. I would suggest that people read the opinions themselves. Now, they're somewhat difficult to get through on occasion, but that's the best reasoning or laying out of the reasoning as to how the justices arrived, at least that they're telling us. Now, there are cynics on both sides who say, oh, no, that's not true. You just want to ban abortion or cut something or enact some other thing. And so, but that is our best information from the justices themselves about what led them to their decisions. As far as the back and forth kind of thing and whether we'll aid that, we're just going to have to wait and see, I think. I certainly am hopeful that we're going to hear more from Justice Thomas, and I think that it's different if you have to take the impetus to interrupt somebody to ask a question rather than somebody calling on you to say, do you have any questions, which is the new format. So it stands to reason that we will hear more from him and perhaps other justices.
Now, the two biggest cases that are coming up before the court must be the abortion case and the Second Amendment case. Now, with these two in particular, whichever way the majority rules, is the reputation of the Supreme Court going to lose? And if so, is it because the public fundamentally misunderstands the role of the court or some other reason?
Mark, to the extent that the public doesn't understand the role of the court, I think they're misinformed by the media, sadly. And, let's take this abortion and guns are certainly two of the cases and issues that I'm following most closely. Let's take that abortion issue for a moment. We recently had a situation where the Supreme Court rejected a motion for a stay to stop the implementation of a Texas abortion law. Now, what the Supreme Court didn't do was hear that case. And what I mean by that is when they hear a case, they accept briefs, they examine the arguments, they have oral arguments, and then they deliberate over that, and then they issue an opinion. That's not what happened. This was more like an emergency application. But I think if you look at the headlines and the popular big box media treatment of this issue, for most folks who are skimming these issues and not reading, 5 layers down, they just see the Supreme Court ruled that this was an okay law. Well, when you peel back the onion, you find out that that's actually not the case. What they said was they weren't going to grant this injunction, but they weren't ruling on the propriety of the law itself. And so we just have ourselves to blame, sadly, in the media for this kind of thing, which is why one of the reasons why we started LibertyNation.com, Mark.
Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Cheers.
And that's all we have time for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I want to thank our guests, Dave Patterson, Andrew Moran, Sarah Cowgill, and of course, Talking Liberty's Scott Cosenza. But as always, you, the listener, deserve the most thanks of all for being here and making it all worthwhile. A final thought to leave you with. There's a problem-solving principle often attributed to Franciscan friar and philosopher William of Ockham. It goes, entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. Or as more commonly phrased, the simplest solution is usually the most likely. when we consider the myriad debacles that are putting all Americans under such monumental pressure, it's a tough call between, is this happening on purpose as part of a grander scheme orchestrated by a shadowy deep state, or is the administration merely incompetent and weak? Perhaps it's time to apply the lessons of Occam's razor. But in the end, that might be an even more terrifying prospect. Until next time, thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.